Hi, I'm Allie Hamilton, and I'm so happy to welcome you to the Come As You Are podcast. Every week, we'll be talking about some aspect of healing, usually around childhood wounds and complicated familial relationships. The topics will always coincide with my personal essay of the week, and this will be a place where we can take a deep dive together. I'm so thrilled you've joined me and delighted for you to always come as you are. Hi there. Hi there. Welcome to this week's topic, and it is highlight, delete. And the idea is not letting yourself make mistakes is the biggest mistake of all. And this is a topic near and dear to my heart because I really had to learn to allow myself to make mistakes and to understand that no matter how hard I tried, I wasn't going to get everything right all the time. And if you are, it's really an interesting thing to consider how mistakes were treated as you were growing. Some of us, like if you, just little things, like I used the example in the essay of spilling a glass of juice when you were a kid. Let's say you were like 5, 6, 7. What happened? Was the response like, "Oh, don't worry, like I've got it. It's just an accident, just a spill, no problem," or was it was it something else? If you, I don't know, grades, like if you did not pull straight A's all the time, like how was that received? If you made a mistake, I don't know, in a social situation as a kid, what happened? Like how were mistakes treated as you were growing up? And also like actual things that are, legitimate mistakes, like the first time you lied to your parents, what happened? For a lot of people, if you are, and in my situation, certainly as I was growing up, it didn't matter if they were small mistakes or large mistakes or, mistakes that really legitimately by any standards you could understand. I was punished swiftly and harshly. And both of my parents had flash rage. They, were not patient people. And my mother's standards were extremely high all the time. And I felt that in order to earn her love, I needed to be perfect. And even if I did everything I could to be perfect, there was still, no guarantee that love could be withdrawn at any time. Now, do I think she really stopped loving me if I upset her? No, but it certainly looked that way and felt that way. So that was my experience with my mom. With my dad, it was also really conditional. If I showed up for him the way that he wanted me to, then he was really loving. But if I spilled a glass of juice, he would, curse loudly. I wrote about this in a prior essay, it might have been reconciliation, but, if he misunderstood me, if he misheard me, if he thought I was being disrespectful, it was not common, but he hit me upside the head. There was a time when I was 14 when I got caught in a lie, and he just wailed on me. It was, it was pretty unbelievable. So I definitely grew up in this environment where I felt like making mistakes was not going to be tolerated. There was not a lot of forgiveness. There wasn't sort of a conversation around everybody makes mistakes. Like that's not what I experienced. And so if that speaks to you, then you probably, this topic is probably going to resonate with you a lot. Maybe it doesn't. Maybe you grew up in a really loving household with patient people, in which case your relationship to making mistakes might be completely different. But my guess is more people fall on the spectrum of being uncomfortable, not getting everything right all the time. And the reason I feel that way is because so few people seem to know how to give just a heartfelt, genuine, unqualified apology. And those two things are very deeply connected. If you understand that you are not going to get everything right all the time, and you don't have that expectation of yourself or anyone else, then when you make a mistake, you're going to be able to just say, I'm really sorry. Like, I blew that moment, and I totally understand why you're upset. I gave it a lot of thought. I know why I came into the situation the way that I did. This won't happen again. Please forgive me. There's no sort of like, well, yeah, I said that, but you said this, or this time, like 6 months ago, you said this. This is not that, or you made me feel like very whatever. Like it's just not. It's rare that people can just look you in the eye and say, I'm really sorry. I understand why you feel the way that you do, and it won't happen again. And so the reason that I think so many people struggle to do that is because they're afraid in a primal way, and probably a subconscious way, of what is going to happen if I admit culpability here, if I admit that I didn't get this right. And it's worth working on because it's a really beautiful skill if you can create that environment for yourself and the people close to you where making mistakes is expected, it's okay. Not everyone has to get everything right all the time. There's compassion, there's forgiveness, there's benefit of the doubt. That really allows people to relax and trust, and know that they're safe, and know that if difficult topics come up or there's conflict, or they blow it in a certain moment, it's not over. Love is not withdrawn, they're not banished from the kingdom. They still have you. And to me, that's a really key part of loving people and creating that world where everyone can just talk about their messy feelings and not worry, not try to edit themselves to only feel a certain way or only say a certain thing, that walking on eggshells thing. And there are too many people living in that situation. And certainly in my life, because I came out of that kind of childhood where that was the way that mistakes were treated, and that was the relationship that I had to mistakes. And it really is something to think about, like, what is my relationship to mistakes? How do I relate to that experience, and what comes up for me? When I started to enter my own relationships as a young adult, I was really doing everything in my power to get everything right all the time. And of course, you're never going to do that. And it was hard for me to say, it was scary for me to say, I'm really sorry, I didn't get that right. Like I blew that, and I'm so sorry, because in my experience, love would be withdrawn, safety might be withdrawn. It was, again, really primal. And you might have people like that in your life who are, they can't be wrong. They're never wrong. Like, if you have a problem with them, like, it's never them, it's always you, or it's something you did or said, or there's a reason that it's not clean. And so for me, as I got older and really started to work on myself, do a lot of rewiring of my system in so many different ways, that was one of the things I had to get super clear on is, everyone makes mistakes. I make mistakes. It's totally human. It's not realistic or reasonable to think that you're going to fall outside of that very human experience. No one does. Literally, no one does. No human being lives a life where they're getting everything right all the time. And so if you understand that, then there's compassion, and there's a reasonable, expectation that you're gonna not get it all, perfectly right all the time. And then you're able to be accountable. And I truly believe this is like a marker of, whatever you want to call it, spiritual maturity, or just the ability to communicate effectively, the ability to be close to people. There's no intimacy if you can never be wrong. Like if you are always right, it really limits intimacy. And my mother was always right. And in fact, at one point in my life, when I was 17, 18, I started going to Al Anon meetings, and Al Anon meetings are for family members of alcoholics. And I started to secretly, I didn't even, in my mind, it wasn't even okay for me to go to these meetings because I knew if she found out I was doing that, she would be furious because she would never admit that she was an alcoholic. And so I don't need to be there, right? Why am I going there? It would have been, so I was always looking over my shoulder, when I would duck down into one of these meetings. And I went for about 3 years, 17 to 20, and it was incredibly helpful. Incredibly helpful because it was sort of like finding a room where all the people from my planet were, because people were raising their hands and they were sharing things. And I started to realize, like, oh, wow, these are just very common attributes of people who grow up in that kind of environment where you don't know what to expect from one day to the other, or you're being parentified. You're taking care of your parents. You are expected to take on adult responsibilities at a tiny age, and or avoid conflict, or keep the peace, or keep the secrets, or make everything look right on the outside. So I started to understand this is a common experience of people growing up in this kind of household and in this kind of situation. And that gave me I started to develop some compassion for myself and other people. And so whenever you're in a conflict with someone, especially someone that you're really close to, if you start to observe a pattern, there's something there. It's not like with my mom, her whole thing of like never being wrong. And I came out of that. I came out of a meeting one day, and I remember this so well because I thought I finally had her. I thought I was going to say this thing that I'd heard in this meeting, and it was going to be like that light bulb moment, and she would finally have to admit something. And so I went home and I said to her, I was like, it's the next opportune moment. Mom, like, do you want to be right or do you want to be happy? And she said, being right makes me happy. And I just thought, wow, like totally did not go the way that I thought. I really, really thought there, some awareness was going to descend in that moment. And so, but that is also very self-aware to be able to say being right makes me happy. Like she knew that about herself. But it was incredibly frustrating, and it did limit, like so many other aspects of her alcoholism, it did limit our ability to be close. So I share this with you just to get your wheels spinning in case you relate, to that kind of struggle, having unrealistic expectations of yourself. And that can come in so many different forms. And when you are trying to make any kind of art, and I don't limit that description to people who are, painters and writers, and it's like poets. I mean, like making art out of your life, anything that you're trying to create. If you have an expectation that you're going to get everything right all the time, you're really going to limit your ability to explore and play and follow your inspiration and not worry about the outcome. And I've certainly, I've been writing my memoir for quite a while now. And I also included this in the essay, but I wrote an entire first draft of my memoir, and I actually gave it to 3 really trusted people, and they loved it. I mean, the feedback I got was great, but I just, at a certain point, I realized, that isn't the way I want to sort of enter the story, or it's not the way I want to tell it. And I put that whole draft in a drawer, and I just started again, and I started over with a different sort of structure and a whole bunch of different things that just felt more like the story I was trying to tell. But that was hours and days and weeks and months and like years of my time and energy that I put in a drawer. And yet none of that was a waste of my time. And that isn't, it's not a mistake. It's just, I needed that process to get to the draft that I'm about to finish, which is the one that I really wanted to write. And even this week, the reason this topic was on my mind is that I spent hours working on an essay, and on Tuesday, and I got up Wednesday, and it just 2 pages, and I read it, and I just was like, no, and I just highlighted and deleted, and I just didn't like it. Like, it wasn't what I wanted to say. It wasn't resonating with me. And part of it is the context, right? Like, right now, there is so much heartache in the world, and it's devastating, and it's painful to see the way people are screaming at each other on the internet, and it's just all of it is just really painful right now. And so part of it is just, I'm like, what can I possibly write at this moment that's going to be helpful, comforting, in any way in this context? And then I had to remind myself that some of the most comforting moments I've had over the last few weeks, because I have been feeling very heart heavy. I've been feeling really disheartened about the state of the world and the state of humanity, and the way people are just going for each other's jugulars, and an inability to just like have any kind of meaningful dialogue has been so. It's just, it's been really awful to see, and be part of, and be swimming in that water. But some of the most comforting moments I've had have been reading things that are not related to what's happening right now, because there's something about a human being sitting down, just trying to communicate something human, just trying to create some art that offers that connection, that place where we get to meet someone. We don't even know them, they're a stranger. Maybe they live on the other side of the world, but they've written something, and we know that thing that they've written. That alone is heartening, right? That alone, like, is a reminder, like, okay, wait a second. Even in the midst of all of this, just cacophony of rage, like, there are people still quietly trying to reach out through all of that and say, hey, I'm hurting, or I've been hurt in my life, or I've felt really alone, or I've felt really scared or heartbroken. Maybe you have too, and even if it's like quote unquote off topic, it's very much on topic. And so that, kind of have been reminding myself, I'm not, geopolitics is not my area of expertise. I'm not going to be writing essays about that. That's outside of my, scope of, I'm not an expert on that. So what I can do, and what I have been working on for 30 plus years, is how to be a human being with a really open heart in a really difficult, strange world sometimes, how to keep your heart open, and how to stay in your human experience and connect with people. I can write about that, and that is helpful. And so there's a difference between getting up and looking at something you wrote the day before and saying, that is not landing for me. That is not, this just isn't feeling like something I really want to share right now or ever. So I'm going to highlight and delete, and having a voice in your head all the time that's telling you what you have to say isn't worthwhile, or, isn't helpful, or, who are you to write a memoir? That's the voice that you definitely need to overcome and disempower. So there's a difference between critical thinking, right? Like looking at something objectively and saying, yeah, that's not quite it. I'm not feeling that. I'm going to put that in the trash. Or like the draft of my memoir, you know what? There's probably some really good stuff in here, and also I'm putting it in a drawer. Like that's your, for me, that's like critical thinking. It's like, no, it's just still not quite what I want to say and what I want to put out there. So it's got some value in it. I'm going to put it here so that if I want to look at it, if I get stuck somewhere in this new sort of way that I'm writing this, I can always refer back to it, or maybe it'll get my wheels spinning in 5 years about something totally different. There's something in this that I'm going to keep, or like the essay that I just totally deleted. That is going to be helpful to you, right? That's sort of like yes to this, maybe to this, and no to that, versus like a constant voice in your head that's telling you you're not good enough, or you can't create art because you don't have anything meaningful to share. So those are things to look at. And if you are someone who lives with a really harsh inner critic, chances are you're also a perfectionist, right? Your expectations of yourself are not reasonable and they're not realistic. But if you don't work on it, then you're going to be in a constant state of disappointment and maybe even self-loathing, certainly self-doubt, and that's not going to serve you, and it's not going to serve anyone else. You do have your own unique perspective to share, and literally no one on this planet has had the exact same experiences you have, and therefore no one on this planet has the exact same perspective, the exact same, way of phrasing things. And I'm sure you've had this experience that you read something, or you hear something, or you see something, and it's like a light bulb moment. It's just it is exactly what you needed to read or hear or see in that exact right moment. If you are someone who is telling yourself, I don't have anything useful to say, you're denying the world of your own unique perspective. And you really want to work on that, right? And look at it and try to erode that tendency. And I know a lot about that, because I realized that when I started practicing yoga, that was also the first time I started to understand there are tools to quiet your mind. For me, I had been living in my head, my whole life with a racket going on. And the racket was largely, like, you suck. You don't measure up. You're not good enough. Like, you're unlovable. Your own mother couldn't love you. Like, all the stories, the narratives that we carry around, all that stuff is up there, along with like a conversation you had yesterday, maybe a conversation you're going to have tomorrow that you're concerned about. The present moment, like, you might land there once in a while if you're lucky, right? But for a lot of people, they're just living like in that mayhem that's going on, kind of caught up in the past, the future, and maybe just if once in a while, like a big enough sensation pulls them back into their body, or a big enough event, or an important enough person walks in, or that they're gonna, okay, let me be here, or they have a passion where they lose themselves for a little while. But short of that, if you don't do something, then you're living with this this very loud inner world. Most people, apparently there are people who do not have an inner dialogue, and that is so wild to me. Or there are people who, like, for me, if I say the word apple, right, I see an apple in my mind. I can like see it. And there are people that doesn't happen. So it's very interesting. The brain, the mind is very, very interesting, and not everyone is the same. And there's also the whole thing of like, one of the most powerful things I read this week was a piece about words, which I wrote a piece about words last week, when everyone has the mic, and somebody else whose name is escaping me right now wrote a piece about how words can mean different things to different people. And this is something we've talked about before. It's that idea, if I say I love you, I might mean one thing, and if you say I love you, you might mean something else. And for example, my mother, is like, I love you if you do what I want you to do, and you feel the way I want you to feel, and you say the things I want you to say, and you look the way I want you to look, then I love you. But if you start to tell me I have a drinking problem, or you're worried, you're concerned, or like, then I'm angry, and I'm going to withdraw that love. If you start to, my job as a kid was to not literally cause, I wasn't supposed to cause any trouble at all. I was supposed to be a source of help, and be, living at this very high level of make the family look good, make me look good, get those straight A's, look right, act right, so that you reflect well on me. That's sort of a vibe. Not really sort of a vibe, that exact thing. And so anytime the perception was that I was falling short of that, then the way it felt to me, whether it is true or not, is that love was being withdrawn, approval was being withdrawn. Affection was always hard to come by. My mother was not affectionate with me. So it was rough, and that you can internalize that stuff and I certainly did. And so it's worth, again, from the beginning of this talk, just really considering your own relationship with that, your own expectations of yourself. When you are a kid and you are living in an environment where those expectations are so unreasonable, you're probably going to start to rebel at some point. Most kids reach a certain age, they want autonomy, but also if there's a lot of control going on, they're going to want to push back against that. And that certainly happened for me. And if you know that you're not going to get everything right all the time, if you start to understand that, but you know that you're supposed to, what are you going to do? You're going to start to either lie when you have fallen short of, a very high expectation, or you're going to become sneaky so you can do the things you want to do without having, this very intense hammer come down. That's what's going to happen. And those are things that you're also going to want to rewire at a certain point. Having to walk on eggshells, having to deny how you feel, and that is another very key aspect to growing up in an alcoholic household. But any gaslighting situation where you're looking at something, it's like, as obvious as the sky is blue, and everyone in your life is telling you, no, the sky is, magenta, and there's something wrong with your perception, and if that is the environment that you're growing up in, then it's really hard to trust yourself. And that's another thing that you're going to have to rewire at a certain point. Okay, so basically, in order to create any kind of art and to be intimate in a real way with anyone in your life, you're really going to have to take a look at, what am I expecting of myself, day to day and also long term. The other sort of part of this equation is attachment, right? There are certain things that can blind us to what is actually happening. And I wrote about the end of my first marriage, and that was certainly in my life, one of the most painful chapters. I mean, nobody wants to be in a situation where they have tiny children and, their marriage is on fire. Like, nobody wants to be in that situation. It's the last thing anyone wants. And for me, my whole life, I just wanted to create a happy family living under one roof, because I didn't get to experience that. My parents were divorced when I was 4. My dad left when I was 4. The divorce, I think it took about a year, but and then neither household was happy. There's a lot of acrimony between my parents. I think my mother was extremely heartbroken and, angry, as she had every right to be. My dad was unfaithful like multiple times, all the time, from the time she became pregnant till the time they got divorced. So, it was rough, and she was young, and I think he really, he really broke her heart. And so she was angry, and it showed. I could feel that, I could see that. And he was not somebody who was going to own that stuff. It was, he was the victim. And, he was the victim of all these women who just couldn't share him. And, all these women that he made commitments to and then broke those commitments, it was them. And so, he wasn't going to look her in the eye and say, I really blew this and I really hurt you and I'm so sorry. That wasn't going to happen. And so she was angry. And so I was in the middle of all of that. And then, her alcoholism and his rampant womanizing, and that's the environment that I was growing up in. So all I had wanted was to create my own happy, intact family. That's what I had on my mind, in addition to whatever else I was going to do with my life. And to see that just, falling apart was devastating for me. And my son was the same age I was when my parents split, and I had an 18-month-old who was still nursing. I mean, my kids were tiny, and it was the last thing that I wanted. And it isn't just that I was thinking of this as at the time, I don't think of it this way anymore, but at the time I was thinking of this as just, this tremendous failure. I had failed to create the thing that I wanted the most, and I had failed for myself and I had failed for my children. I just couldn't, I just didn't want that for them. And it is about a million times worse when you have children in the mix. It's one thing if your own heart is going to be broken and there are going to be repercussions for you, but when there are now children in the mix, it's and I'm not trying to quantify, it's very painful to go through an ending of a relationship, no matter who you are, where you are. I'm just also trying to illustrate that when you have had these babies who didn't ask to be here, and you've created this situation, or you've participated in this situation, the thought of these tiny, defenseless, beautiful, curious, open-hearted, affectionate human beings having to now pay because you failed is just, it's devastating. That's the way I experienced it at the time. I really do not think of it as a failure anymore. But that is the mind space I was in as my marriage was dying, my first marriage, as it was dying. And that last, and I had done anything and everything I could possibly do to try to avoid that outcome. My only experience of divorce is what I knew. And so I just thought that is all, and that's most of us, right? Our definition of a word is based on our experience, our own lived experience with that word. So my lived experience with divorce was devastation, it just was disharmony, nothing you would ever want for people that you love. And so I was actively doing everything in my power to avoid this giant, event from occurring. And when you're so attached to an outcome of things looking a particular way, right? Having a particular outcome, that's not just your expectation, that's your deepest desire. You're not going to be living truthfully and freely and all of that. And so that last year we were in therapy, I had shrunk myself to 10% of who I am in order to possibly make it work. I was just literally shrinking myself. And nothing I was doing just wasn't, and I finally looked at my ex-husband one day, and I'm not going to share, what led to this, but it was just an incredibly painful day. And I just looked at him and I said, you don't want to be here. You don't want to be here. And I just remember speaking that truth, and everything in that moment, it was the world went back on its axis, because all of that work I had been doing to avoid that truth, you know, I just realized, like, okay, wait a second, like, that's actually what it is. It's not any other thing. There's nothing I can do or say or be, or, you know, like, it doesn't, that's the reality of the situation. And once I said that, it was so obvious to both of us. It was like the sentence that needed to get said, you know, and the lights came back on. It was just like, you know, I mean, it still didn't make it at all easy. I think that even, you know, after I said it, there was like some desire to make it not be true. You know, it was like, that is the truth. Like, that's really, when you boil it down, that's really what is happening here. When you are so attached to, like, wanting things to be a particular way, it can absolutely blind you from the truth and create a lot of pain. And there was no way, I mean, that was a gift when I was finally able to get those words out of my mouth. It was a gift to me, it was a gift to my kids, it was a gift to my ex-husband. It was absolutely the freeing moment for all four of us to, you know, be dealing in reality. And that's something that doesn't happen in an alcoholic household. You're not, and certainly not in mine. And some, if you're talking about someone who's like working hard to get sober and stay sober, we're in a different ballgame. But when you love an addict and they will not face it, they're asking you to accept a version of reality that isn't true. And that's how I grew up. You know, I grew up with a situation where my mother absolutely, and everyone around her, absolutely refused to admit that there was a problem. And so, yeah, that's part of the problem with, like, expectations and attachment and wanting things to be a certain way or look a certain way or wanting other people to feel a certain way or want things, you know, that you want. And I was writing about that, like, that experience sometimes where you might be with someone and you're like, wow, like, you see the potential. You know, this could be so great if only, like, this person was completely different. It's like, what you're saying is this could be great if this was a different person. You know, it's like, you got to work with people as they are. And it doesn't mean we all can change and grow and learn things and evolve and do better, certainly. But, you know, you can't, like, falling in love with someone's potential is a dangerous game, and thinking that you are going to love someone enough to make everything better for them is a dangerous game. And you know, being attached to, like, that, and it's hard not to be, whatever outcome it is going to limit your ability to see clearly, and opening to the reality that life can be really messy sometimes, and people can be really messy sometimes, and feelings can be really messy sometimes, is a liberation, you know. And I think that's probably the biggest reason this is such an important topic to consider, this whole idea of what is my relationship to, you know, mistakes is not necessarily the right word, because it wasn't a mistake. I needed that experience, and so did everybody in the situation, in order to learn and grow. You know, if I hadn't been through that, I wouldn't have the two children that I have, who mean more, you know, to me than anything. And I wouldn't have met my husband. You know, all those things are true. And I wouldn't have met his children. You know, like, there's a lot of things that wouldn't have happened if I hadn't gone through all of the things that I went through. And same thing for him, and same thing for everybody. It's like, whatever the most painful, messy things are in your life that didn't go the way that you thought they would, that didn't, you know, you didn't get everything right, or it didn't work out the way that you wanted it to, that's also the stuff that undoubtedly made you grow the most. And that's the stuff that you unfortunately needed in order to learn, and in order to make different decisions next time, and in order to, I talked about sort of like, you know, this whole idea of gripping the steering wheel with your sticky fingers and trying to white knuckle your way through life and get the outcome that you want, you know, the perfect picture of, like, how things are supposed to be. you're going to make yourself sick, and if there are other people in the car with you, like, you're going to make them sick too. It's just not, like, it's not how we do. It just doesn't work. You never ever, no matter what we're talking about, a book, a TED Talk, anything, nobody ever gets up and says, I white knuckled my way through and I, just demanded that everyone want the things that I thought they should want and it worked out great. Like, that is not it. And so being able to let go of the script, and let go of the image, let go of the picture, even if it breaks your heart, even if it's a totally understandable, reasonable picture for you to want. Like, there's nothing wrong with wanting to have a happy family under one roof. I have that now. It just looks different than I thought that it would. And I mean, everything I wanted to give my children, I was able to give them because I got that sentence out of my mouth. What I wanted to give them was a really happy home full of laughter and fun and, running around dressed up like Jedis. Like, I wanted them to have that innocence and that just security and that stability and, the opportunity to just be innocent, and just be children. Like, I really wanted that for them. I wouldn't have been able to give it to them any other way. And so sometimes letting go of these like really intense expectations that we have, or these really primal attachments we have to things, is the key to letting all the beauty flow and having some trust, and opening your hands and just realizing, like, this isn't the way to do this ride. This isn't the way, like, to hold on and, power through is not really, that's not really it. So, I hope this has given you some things to consider. It's human, absolutely, to have attachments, and we're going to be attached to other people. That's part of the human experience, and because of that, we're going to suffer. And that might sound, I don't know, really sad, but it's actually, I mean, that part of it is really painful. But loving people, even though we all have expiration dates, that's like the bravest, truest thing you can do, and the best thing you can do. Because what else is there here on this earth, right? There's a lot of suffering. There's a lot of violence. There's a lot of just incomprehensible. I mean, it's just, it hurts your heart, right? So if you aren't going to, at the very least, make your art, and like find your people and love them with your whole heart, then I don't know what the point is, So for me, those are my expectations now, right? My expectations have totally shifted from, trying to white knuckle my way into anything, whether it's writing a book or, being in a marriage. I had absolutely no plans to ever get married again, and I actually had plans to never get married again. Like, those are the plans that I had, but staying open and realizing, like, that's fear. That's fear is what that is. And you don't have to let that fear rule your life. And the reality is, we are all vulnerable and we are all messy, and we're not going to get every single thing right all the time. And that's kind of what makes life interesting. Part of what makes life interesting, certainly. And the more you can start to embrace that and surrender to that, still you're doing your best, right? Still you're going to show up and do your best to be a compassionate human being walking the face of this earth, right? A kind, open-hearted, open-minded person who can extend a hand in the dark to somebody who's struggling, or knows how to show up, knows how to say, I'm so sorry, knows how to forgive people, knows how to extend the benefit of the doubt. Absolutely. All those things are, like, I hope those are your intentions, right? But if you also have an expectation with that you're going to be able to do that every minute of every day, like, that's something to look at, because nobody can or does. Not even the Dalai Lama. Like, he would tell you himself, and he does when he speaks to people. You know, everyone has their own human struggles and foibles, and you've got to be able to accept that, you know, and open to that if you want to be able to create anything real and true and beautiful that's flowing. So I hope that, you know, I hope this gives you some food for thought. I hope it's comforting in these just really painful times. And I'm always, you know, I'm always around to talk about any of this if you would like to. Thanks for joining me for this talk.